Good evening and welcome to the final episode of the People's Platform for 2022. This is the People's Platform in retrospect. 9 months ago, when we started this program, it was almost a knee-jerk reaction to the people's protests which were being held island-wide. There was a resounding clamour for an end to be brought to the political mismanagement, the economic mismanagement, the plundering and looting of national resources. We sensed that people also needed to know for themselves how they could be more politically savvy and enhance their understanding of the way things worked. So after a few sessions of brainstorming, we agreed on conceptualizing a simple talk show where people could just listen to and learn from experts. So we put together some stools, got down some of our favorite guests and hosted our first ever show. And the response was promising. Here's a snippet of what we discussed on our first ever show.
Once people do have gas, electricity, milk, whatever it is that we are constantly running short of, I don't think there's anything wrong with them going back to their usual lives. A democracy must work that way.
Sure.
Public institutions are there to deliver.
Right, yeah.
So they need to come out like this when institutions fail. But in order for them to do that, there has to be background work that has to be done. And young people have done that for themselves. Really, some of these organizations are run by young people. So I sometimes wonder whether we need to step in at all in that sense. Okay. They are seeking information and they're going to the people that they need to go to get the information. But I think what we have to do as much as we can is to impress on our public institutions to deliver and deliver right now.
It is not enough to just abolish the executive presidency because our public institutions have been politicized and they are quite dysfunctional. Having been part of a public institution for 5 years and having had to interact with pretty much every single public institution there was, from the military to the police to the Department of Education, I can tell you there is a huge problem there in terms of politicization, lack of independence, lack of efficiency, and of course our public service is very bloated. Lack of accountability. So I think you need to also change that. But once again, abolishing the executive presidency, I think, is only the first step. There is a lot more to do, and it has to do not just with laws, rules and regulations, but values and culture.
So through the People's Platform, what we wanted to do was to feature a diverse panel of experts from a multitude of disciplines, from lawyers to economists to intellectuals and technocrats and academics, to share their insights on varying perspectives and international best practices to emerge out of the crisis. We also wanted the show to act as an educator, to break down complex legal issues, technical economic issues, and questions related to the economic crisis, other socio-economic issues, so that the viewers may comprehend it in a simple and non-technical manner. So after a few weeks, we managed to get better chairs, a logo, and instead of hosting a daily show, we settled on hosting a Sinhala show on Mondays and an English show on Fridays.
පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට මන්ත්‍රී කෙනෙක් එන්නේ ඇයි? පාර්ලිමේන්තු මන්ත්‍රී කෙනෙක්ගේ කාර්යභාරය මොකක්ද? තහඩු ටිකක් බෙදෙන එකවත්, වතුර ටැංකියක් දෙන එකවත්, පාරක් කාපට් කරලා පාරක් විවෘත කරන එකවත්, බිල්ඩින් එකක් ඉස්කෝලේක මේ විද්‍යාගාරයක් ඕපන් කරන එකවත් නෙමෙයිනේ. මේකට එන්නෙම ප්‍රතිපත්ති සංවාදනය කරන්න. රටේ මූල්‍ය බලය ගැන මූල්‍ය බලය ගැන තීන්දුව తీරන ගන්න. මේකනේ එන ඒ කියන්නේ බරපතල කාරණාවකට තමයි එවන්නේ. හැබැයි කාවද එවන්නේ? හරිද? එවන්නේ මේ කොහොම ඉස්කෝලේ මේ 5 වසරට විතර ගිහලා ඉතින් එහාට කැලෑ පැනලා මොකක් හරි කර මිනිස්සෙක්. කෝච් එක මාලා කඩපු මිනිස්සෙක්. එතකොට එහෙම නැත්තම් ඒ කියන්නේ මොකක් හරි අර නීති විරෝධී බිස්නස් එකක් කරලා හරි අපි කියන්නේ දේශපාලඥයෙක් වම ටක් ගාලා අනිත් පැත්තේ මතක් වෙන නම්ට දෙනවා ස්ත්‍රී දූෂකයෝ මිනි මරුවෝ පාතාලයෝ කුඩ්ඩෝ ඔහොමනේ කියන්නේ ඒකට අපිට ඩිෆයින් කරලා තියෙන
Linguistic equity is of pivotal importance. One of the initial learnings we had from the show was that knowledge dissemination must take place trilingually. So despite the logistical hardships, we introduced the People's Platform in Tamil.
வணக்கம் நேயர்களே. இலங்கையின் தொலைக்காட்சி நேயர்களுக்கு ஒரு புதிய அனுபவத்தை பெற்றுக் கொடுக்கும் வகையிலே நாங்கள் புதிய ஒரு முயற்சியாக பழமையாகவே எமது அலைவரிசை ஒவ்வொரு முறையும் மக்களுக்கு புதிய அனுபவத்தை வழங்குவதிலே நாங்கள் எப்போதும் பின்பதில்லை. அந்த வகையில் இம்முறை நாங்கள் இந்த பீப்பிள் பிளாட்ஃபார்ம், அதாவது புரவசி ஹண்டர் என்ற வகையிலே 2 மொழிகளில் இதுவரை காலமும் ஒளிபரப்பான இந்த நிகழ்ச்சியை இன்று முதல் மக்கள் மன்றம் என்ற பெயரிலே தமிழ் மொழியிலும் மாதம் ஒரு நிகழ்ச்சி என்ற வகையிலே இங்கே பகிரப்படுகின்ற முக்கியமான தகவல்களை உங்களிடம் கொண்டு சேர்க்கும் வகையிலே நாங்கள்
முதலாவது நான் முதலே கூறியது போன்று எமது நாட்டில் இவ்வாறாக வெளியே வருகின்ற பெண்களுக்கு அரசாங்கம் பெரிதாக ஆதரவு வழங்குவதில்லை. இருக்கின்ற ஆதரவு கூட, அதாவது போலீஸ் நிலையங்கள் கூட பெண்களுக்கு ஆதரவாக இருப்பதில்லை. அது முதலாவது விடயம். இருந்த போதிலும் நீதிமன்றத்தில் நாங்கள் சென்று ஒரு குடும்ப வன்முறை வழக்கை தொடுத்தால் நீதிமன்றத்துக்கு இந்த பெண் தன்னை பராமரித்துக் கொள்வதற்கு தாபரிப்பு தொகையை வழங்குவதற்கு அந்த நீதிமன்றத்துக்கு நீதவான் நீதிமன்றத்துக்கு குடும்ப வன்முறை சட்டத்திற்கு ஏற்பாடுகள் காணப்படுகிறது. எனவே அந்த நிவாரணத்தை அந்த பெண் பெற்றுக்கொள்ளக்கூடிய வாய்ப்புகள் காணப்படுகிறது. மூன்றாவது விடயம்தான் சமூகம். ஒரு பெண் குடும்ப வன்முறைக்குள் பாதிக்கப்படுகின்றார்கள்னா நாங்கள் எவ்வளவு அக்கறை எடுத்து அந்த பெண்ணை மீண்டும் குடும்பத்திற்குள் செல்ல முயற்சிக்கின்றோமோ அதே அக்கறை எடுத்து ஒரு பெண் வெளியே முயல்கின்றார்கள் அவருக்கு என்ன முறையான சப்போர்ட் ஆதரவை நாங்கள் கொடுக்கக்கூடிய மாதிரி இருக்கும். அதாவது பொருளாதார ரீதியாக அல்லது மானசீக ரீதியாக அல்லது ஒரு நட்பு ரீதியாக நாங்கள் எவ்வாறு அந்த பெண்ணை அந்த திருமணத்தை விட்டு வெளியே சாதாரண ஒரு வாழ்க்கையை வாழ்வதற்கு எவ்வாறு நாங்கள் ஆதரவை கொடுக்கக்கூடிய கூடியவர்களாக இருக்கின்றோம் என்பதை பற்றி சமூக ரீதியாக நாங்கள் சற்று நிச்சயமாக சிந்தித்து பார்க்க வேண்டும்.
This program was conceptualized to discuss a plethora of issues, one of which was the importance of the people's sovereignty and the democratization of human rights, economic and social rights. When on the show, Professor Savithri Gunasekara left no holds barred.
Correct. That the Constitution says that the President cannot be kicked out if he is to be asked to, without completing his term, he must be impeached, or on the other hand he must resign. So he has choice in that regard unless he is, that is supposed to be the protecting the sovereign right of the people to elect a government, right? But on the other hand, where a president has lost the confidence of the people, as manifested in these significant massive protests, vibrant, passionate, responding to the reality of the suffering imposed by the government and by the president through maladministration, etc. And there is no time to go through the path of impeachment. Then one would say that it is an obligation of that president and the government to respond to that voice of the people. And this is what they're not doing. And I would like to just flag the fact that they are violating not just a moral responsibility, a legal responsibility. Because the other part of the Constitution is that the sovereignty is in the people. The President is the executive arm of governance, of the people's right to governance.
Another key concern that we went into was the clamour for accountability and a conscionable set of legislators. What was the meaning of having a people's mandate? Some interesting perspectives were shared by Mr. Faiz Mustafa, President's Counsel, Dr. Gehan Gunathilaka and Dr. Pakyasoti Sarvanamuttu.
A large part of the electorate is dissatisfied with the performance of his member of parliament.
Right.
They can have a set in motion, a process for recall. And then there is virtually like another election. So maybe if we could filter out, if people feel that they are represented or proactive in parliament, they could filter them out. Of course, you should have mechanisms so that it's not abused, and the stability of the government should not be affected. But in long term, that we can explore that mechanism. Because now most of the representatives are immune to the wishes of the people. Once you elect them, they are law unto themselves.
Personally, I think the Gotabaya Rajapaksa presidential response to the protests had a tension, an internal tension, between wanting to be a strong man and also wanting to be popular. Because of course it was a popular mandate and there was a desire to also please the people and be liked. I don't think the new presidency has that tension. And I think that is something to sort of reflect on.
All right.
The government of the day understands the police as being its sort of personal protection force. The police is there to serve the people. And the police has a responsibility to uphold the people's enjoyment of their fundamental rights, like freedom of speech, freedom of association, all of that. So we have to also change the paradigm of governance that we have in this country. The police are a key target of that in terms of, we know what the reputation of the police has been with regard to torture and all of those kinds of things. Not that the entire police force is guilty of it, but it does have a stain on its reputation, and we need to change all of that. But you can't change it with a government that is obstinately refusing, adamantly, obstinately refusing to heed what the people are saying to it.
During the people's protests, we witnessed a great resurgence in public consciousness and the willingness of the people to get involved in this process of societal renaissance by educating themselves. The Bar Association of Sri Lanka was a key stakeholder in creating this legal education paradigm.
There is a famous incident, they say, when Mr. Bandaranaike went to some university, I don't know whether it was Peradeniya, so he was hooted. And he had said, well, he had referred to the foxes, to the in Sinhala Nari, and that when they recognize their leader, and this is how they are welcoming him. So when you are a ruler, you must learn to tolerate dissent in a democracy, and army officers and police, the army should not be used to stifle protesters. Those protests on the ramparts were ever absolutely peaceful. There was no allegation of violence, none whatsoever. And this is a situation which must be arrested. The commander of the army, the Inspector General of Police, must be held to account, and they must ensure that the officers are not used for these purposes.
The crisis in Sri Lanka was not just political, but also had massive economic repercussions. Our focus shifted on how we could enable economic recovery through political stability.
One good thing, a silver lining in a dark cloud is the fact that more and more politicians are now saying, hey, let's stop these massive infrastructure projects, at least for a while.
Right.
And let's make sure that our citizens have food, medicine, and energy.
Yeah.
Right? Because to make sure that the economy will, be ticking on, it won't be totally dead. Now to do so, because as I said earlier, the budget deficit, large deficit, the very few ways of reducing it. Yes, you can cut waste and all of that, but it's quite likely that there'll be a sharp reduction in capital expenditure, all sorts of capital expenditure. And then when things improve a little bit, we have to improve on our selection criteria and the so-called public procurement criteria.
It was quite evident that taxation had a key role to play in resuscitating Sri Lanka's economy. Dr. Nishant Imel spoke at length on the varied nuances of taxation policy.
You and I will probably pay a great deal more in tax for that consequence. So the fact that there is no transparency on these tax breaks that have been given that are then having consequences back on society. And some companies, including Port City, I think, are in setting up the law to have their employees exempt from paying income tax. So if you work in some places, you may not even have to pay income tax, but then others must pay on your behalf. The government still has a revenue target. If, according to what we have seen in the appropriation bill, the government must increase revenue by 68% to meet the target that they have set out for debt sustainability. So somebody has to pay the tax. The question is, are we unjustly taking it from one set of people while allowing others to have something better off? So analysis and transparency are critical. Right. And I think we may need to ask how we can move the institutions of this country, even the courts, to make democracy work a little better.
Right.
Because people are not, people have effectively no representation in the decisions. You will know that even from the Gazette that was passed recently, the government in the interim budget a couple of months ago, 1.5 months ago, I think, announced a particular form of taxation.
Yeah.
Now, the Gazette that actually passed into law was wholly different from that.
Yeah.
It was a huge increase without discussion. So it wasn't subject to the democratic process of discussion, discernment, analysis, because government is able to exercise huge discretion and decision making without any representation of social feedback coming into it. And I think the crisis in Sri Lanka is one of democracy.
Wow.
There is no representation, and that is maintained by the absence of analysis and transparency.
Yeah. The island-wide protests also brought to the fore the deep-rooted, unresolved and ugly realizations of unconscious bias, prejudices and the need to be more sensitive to the problems that had been brewing for years. The lack of a cogent transitional justice process, the collective failures of the Sri Lankan state and the citizen to participate in a journey from healing from the 26-year conflict in Sri Lanka, and the way forward were also discussed during a discussion with Dr. Radhika Kumaraswamy.
Bulldozing cemeteries, prevent people from lighting candles, and this is just not necessary. You know, it's just prevent people from mourning. It's not necessary. You don't need to do that. You can allow people to mourn. You can allow people to acknowledge. To memorialize their children, after all, and I think it also makes the state people have a sense of more of a belongings, have a sense of a benign state if you allow them to do that. But if you keep crushing them at a very personal level, this is as personal as you can come to light a candle for your son.
Right.
Then, you know, they will always see the state as alien and foreign and oppressive.
The past few months have had a severe mental toll on the people of Sri Lanka as a result of the countless struggles that followed the multiple crises in the country. It was important to have conversations on mental health, overcoming depression, anxiety, and feeling helpless. Consultant psychiatrist Dr. M. Ganesan spoke at length on the help at hand.
He said, when we say mental health, it's not just the disease we are talking about. It's overall sense of well-being, our capacity to cope with the day-to-day stresses, how we manage our emotions, how effective and active we are in society. All those things matter in mental health. So, when we talk about the mental health system, we are talking about prevention. We also talk about treating disorders. And also we talk about promoting mental health. Right? So this is a very big area, and every citizen has a role to play in mental health. It's not just the psychiatrist or the mental health professionals alone. But when we talk about the Ministry of Health and its role in mental health, the primary role is diagnosing and treating the people suffering from mental health disorders. And so in 2005, we came up with the mental health policy, where our the unit of management of mental disorders, etc., will be on a basis of a district. So we plan that every district should have a small inpatient unit and a lot of outpatient services, and should offer a range of services. And to some extent, it has happened. Since 2005, we have moved a long way.
Right.
But still, yes, as you said, there are major discrepancies when we compare the districts. Some districts have fairly good quality of services, some don't, and the allocation is poor.
We also focused on the importance of mainstreaming the disability rights discourse in Sri Lanka and the importance of enabling better child protection.
The global disability rights discourse, the movement, recognizes the slogan, "Nothing about us without us," which Niluka pointed out to us when we were having the sidelines discussion. So the people with disabilities across the world always say, "Nothing about us without us." Do not make any decisions on behalf of us without us.
Wow.
It has to be consultative, because we know what we require. When you are setting up a ramp, consult us,
Right.
a wheelchair user, because you, without using a wheelchair, wouldn't know how a ramp needs to be designed.
Okay.
We know what we need. Say, for example, so this does happen, Sonali, though, in some parts of this country, in some sectors.
Okay.
Say, for example, the Election Commission of Sri Lanka is a pioneer in consulting people with disabilities in making decisions with regards to the political participation of people with disabilities. So they're having consultations with, say, for example, the blind community on designing a tactile ballot guide
Amazing, yeah.
that would assist them to vote without assistance. They are working with a group called the Disability Inclusive Elections in Sri Lanka, across disability, multi-stakeholder group of people with disabilities and organizations of people with disabilities to consult in every decision they make with regard to access to electoral participation for people with disabilities.
Ultimately, and as a way forward, we aspire to be a part of a Sri Lanka that is inclusive, where the people's voices are heard, where the legislators act in trust for the people. We discussed Sri Lanka after the Aragale, the people's struggle, to discuss if Sri Lankan politics has changed with Professor Jayadeva Uyangoda.
Represents one of the key dimensions of the crisis of representational democracy in Sri Lanka, because the electoral process has been subjected to the influence by those who have wealth, who have money, and who finance individual candidates as well as political parties. So political corruption has become actually a normal dimension of Sri Lankan politics, and it has happened in many other countries as well. So the normalization of political corruption is one of the key reasons for the decay of democracy in Sri Lanka. That is why, that's also this issue has been highlighted during the Aragale as well. That's why people are saying that we need a new political culture.
Right.
We need our representatives to be accountable. You know, the accountable governance means, particularly, you know, in terms of, say, the political parties also. Political parties theoretically are considered as the main link between citizens and the state. You know, they are the link in a democracy. But political parties, you know, are not democratic in Sri Lanka.
These were just a few of the areas we covered out of a multitude of others which we didn't show you on tonight's recap show. Thank you to all the guests who were a part of this experimental venture to act as an educator, an opinion former. We also thank the team behind the show, the makeup artists, the editors, the cameramen, the researchers, for such an incredible job. What we understood through this was that we started this with the aim of opening up the discussion platforms to talk about rights, responsibilities, but also vulnerabilities, law and politics, but also the importance of being joyous. Thank you so much for watching us. We look forward to meeting you in 2023 with more empathetic policymakers who care about the people they serve, and a more aware citizenry who will hold to account the policymakers as well as themselves. Have a safe weekend and good night.